Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Ask the Expert session today at Ignite. Regardless of where you are in the world, we're really excited to talk to you a little bit about Microsoft 365 and Azure data protection strategies. I know personally I find that there can be a lot of questions regarding this topic. When should I use Microsoft? When should I use third party? So this is going to be your opportunity to ask the experts some questions around this. So let's get started. My name is Teresa Miller, and I'm a field CTO as well as a Microsoft MVP with Cohesity. And I'm joined with two other wonderful guests who will introduce themselves and address this topic today. So Pumala.
Hi, I'm Pumla Schmidt. I'm a senior cloud advocate here at Microsoft, and I have a broad background in virtualization, storage, exchange, and basically server and infrastructure, managing server infrastructures. I actually work with our other guests. So there you go, Sonia.
Hi everyone, I'm Sonia Cuff and I'm also a senior cloud advocate for Microsoft. I have a background in similar things to Pumla, but I've had time in the enterprise space and also in the small and medium business space as well. And we talk to IT pros about using Azure and some of the infrastructure challenges that they have.
Thank you both so much for being here today. I know we're going to have a really interesting conversation with our audience. Also with us today, we have our two chat moderators. They're going to be helping field your questions behind the scenes. Mike, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Mike Letchin. I am the Director of Technical Strategy and Field CTO for Cohesity. I actually work with Teresa and am glad to help out today. And Doug?
Hey guys, glad we had such a great panel here and just happy to be one of the moderators. I am responsible for product marketing at Cohesity for our cloud products and solutions. So super excited just to hear some of the great feedback and answers from our panelists here today.
Awesome. Thank you both as well for helping out. It's a really important role to be able to get these questions to us from the audience. We do have a couple of housekeeping items that I just want to run through real quick, and then I'm going to just kick things off with an overview and we'll start taking questions. So from a housekeeping perspective, our chat moderators will be able to pull your questions forward either anonymous or by your name. If we do not get to your question today, as long as you joined with the full Teams client and joined with your name, we will be able to follow up with you offline. If you came in through the web client or if you chose to be anonymous and we don't get to your question, we won't be able to follow up. So I'm mentioning that in case you'd like to change how you joined. Another housekeeping item is the Microsoft Code of Conduct. Probably not the first time you've seen this today. It's really just about making sure everyone's being respectful by way of the chat today. All right, so an overview of our session in a little bit more detail. I wanted to start with the problem that I know many of you are likely faced with. So your enterprise data is in Microsoft 365 or you're leveraging Azure VMs. It's all critical to your business and you know the data must be recoverable, but you have some questions around SLAs or how to deal with regulatory compliance or how to manage and keep copies of that data as a whole. Well, by way of the solution, you really need to have a solid data recovery plan. And that's likely going to be some combination of the native options that Microsoft offers, but it might also involve a third-party option. And so what we're hoping to help you with today is to work through those differentiations so that you can make some educated decisions for your enterprise. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and we're going to go ahead and take the next 24 to 25 minutes for your questions. All right, so let's see, what kinds of questions do we have coming in today? So question number 1, Pumala, this one is for you. So to date, our organization has relied on Exchange, online policy, and legal hold to retain data. Why should I consider a third-party solution such as Cohesity instead?
Great question. Considering a third-party backup solution is a good alternative if you need to have a point-in-time recovery. Oftentimes organizations need that, healthcare, for instance, even financial industries. If your policy states that, you know, every night at midnight you're doing backups, well, if you happen to have a lawsuit, they may require you to grab backups of that particular point in time. Retention holds are great, especially if you have multiple copies and, you know, your lag copies are 7 days behind and all that good stuff. But when it's very specific to a particular day that you need, let's say Wednesday, March 3rd of 2018, what was in the mailbox that day at, you know, at the point that you had a backup? If you're just doing retention holds, it's not going to be sufficient per se. Like, you're going to get everything in the mailbox rather than what was in the mailbox at that point. So that is a, you know, perfect example of using a third party.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you, Pumala. So this next question is for Sonia. So if my data is in a Microsoft service, don't they back it up for me?
Look, I love this question. The answer is kind of yes, and I hesitate at the end, so let me explain a little bit. When a customer signs an agreement with Microsoft to use one of our online services, for example, we have a couple of pieces of documentation that detail what Microsoft does and what Microsoft isn't responsible for. So we have the Microsoft Online Services terms, and more importantly, we have the Microsoft Online Services Data Protection Addendum. Now, the Data Protection Addendum is specific to each of the different kinds of services, but mostly contains this little line in there that says that Microsoft has no liability for the deletion of customer data. Now, this is very common. You'll find just about any service you use where you're putting data into a cloud, there is this exclusion of liability clause. It keeps the insurers happy, but it's really important for customers to go through and understand what we call the shared responsibility model. And that is understanding what the cloud provider is responsible for doing and what you as a customer are responsible for doing. At the end of the day, it's your data, it's your business that is going to be impacted by the consequences if that data isn't available for any reason. And Microsoft does provide services to help you back up your data, but you sort of need to understand the limitations of those. And also remember, from a cloud provider's perspective, one of the reasons that we do manage backups of data and infrastructure that we're hosting is not necessarily for some of the recovery aspects you want, but to ensure the availability of things. So we're managing that so that if we have a problem in our data centers, for example, we can help restore services and get you up and running again, because that certainly is part of our service level agreement for providing the service to you.
Thanks, Sonia. So this next question is actually for myself. So the question is, when you say enterprise data in M365, what about enterprise data in business applications, whether it's Dynamics, SAP, NetSuite, Workday? Shouldn't that data also be addressed in a similar fashion? And how is that different in an approach from Microsoft 365 data? So I completely agree. I think, you know, Sonia just talked about the shared responsibility model. So anytime you're putting data in the cloud, regardless of the application, you want to do the same level of assessment of how you're managing that data. So first, you want to take a look at what protection options that vendor will offer you. And that can be things as simple as keeping copies of data. I refer to them as the native protection options. But to me, with the shared responsibility, even if you take advantage of those native options, you really should be looking at what are my enterprise SLAs that aren't being met by just keeping a simple copy of that data. Can I do a mass recovery of that data from a version of a document or a version of something in that database table, whatever the case might be? The answer is likely no. So really step back and take a look at what your business needs are. I suspect you're going to do both native options as well as third party. All right, so the next question I have is for Pumala. So they indicated I have just one quick question. Is the issue being addressed with Office 365 dropping email folders off the email tree?
We'll have to get back to you on that one. I can send that question back to the product group for that specific issue.
Okay, as long as they joined by way of identifying themselves, we'll be able to get back to them, unless there's another way for you to share that publicly. What would you suggest, Pumala?
It looks like it was someone that is logged in.
Okay. Okay.
It looks like
fantastic.
It was, I did see the name, but it just flashed. So yeah, Morgan. Okay. So I'll get back to you, Morgan, on that one.
Okay. That sounds great. All right, so our next question is queuing up, so we'll give that just a second to come through.
Where's the dog barking? That's where we're, the dead silence. We just missed the dog barking.
Yeah. It wouldn't be an event or a webinar without a dog barking.
Yes. Or a cat climbing across the desk.
All right, so we have our next question queued up. So this one's for Sonia. So is the liability clause that you talked about the same for all as a service offerings? So infrastructure as a service, PaaS and SaaS, or is it different?
Look, it can vary from one service to another, so I'm not in a position to say that it applies to every single service. What you do need to do is go and find that Microsoft Online Services Data Protection Addendum, because that absolutely spells it out. And the other thing about that is that that's always updated to be current and accurate. I mean, I might say something now that might change next week, for example, and we don't usually make changes to those services that rapidly, but they do kind of iterate over time. So certainly for the specific services that you're interested in, go and check that out, because that is part of the terms and agreements of signing up and using one of these services.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense too, right? It's going to change perhaps at some point. So Pumala, the next question I have is for you. It's around the backup services provided by Microsoft. Regarding limitations, the question itself doesn't cue into whether they mean Microsoft 365 or Azure. So let's just gear this one toward Microsoft 365.
Well, Microsoft 3, so we talking about like Exchange, SharePoint? Because
yeah, it's very generic here.
Yeah, because there is no backup solution within Exchange or Skype, SharePoint. You know that like it's all based off retention policies, right? Legal holds. That is the backup. The multiple copies of your databases that Microsoft provides for you, those multiple copies. That is the backup solution. I say that with air quotes. and all the retention policies that you as the customer would put in place. As the administrator, you would assign those retention policies. The limitation to that, as I spoke earlier, is the point in time recovery that you would need when we're talking about Exchange and Teams. As I said, I almost said Skype for Business. There are some people still using that. They haven't completely switched over yet. They are in the process. But yeah, it's right now the saying is if you put all the retention holds and the legal holds in place, you technically don't need backups unless you need the point in time recovery, which a lot of companies still require that. And it's based off their policies, and their requirements that are being asked potentially by the industry that they're in.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm going to grab the next question. So the question is, what is the recommended approach for backup of SharePoint Online content? So by way of SharePoint Online, I think there's a couple different ways to approach it. And this goes back to that shared responsibility model where with SharePoint Online, for example, if a file or folder is deleted, you're going to have 93 days to get it back. If you even miss that, you still have another 30 days in the site collection administrator. They have some additional ways to pull that data back. Now, I would, and versioning. Don't forget versioning. Leverage your version control. Now, those are all really great options for the one-off 1Z, 2Z type recovery. Where things get complicated is when you need to do mass restores according to business level SLAs. There's no guaranteed recovery point if you have to pull back something in bulk. So there's that piece, and that's where I would start looking at third party. The other element to SharePoint Online that could be relevant to your business is by way of governance. What are the specific governance models that you would need to adhere to? So let's say that's SOX compliance. And by way of that, maybe you need to make sure you're retaining data for 7 years and you have to retain everything. So if that's the case, I would lean toward a third-party option for that. The next question, I'm going to actually go back to the question that I asked Pumala before. So this one's going to go to Sonia. But I would like to take the spin on Azure, if we could, Sonia. So regarding the question around, do the backup services provided by Microsoft have any limitations? Let's approach that from Azure, because there's definitely, you have Azure Backup where you can tap into, and we could perhaps address it that way.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Look, any backup service that you use has limitations. If you are installing some backup software and managing it in your on-premises environment, you're limited by the amount of storage that you've got and your time windows for the backup. So every single backup system you use will have limitations. Difference here being is that when you're using the backup services provided by somebody else, you're at the mercy of their limitations. You can't just go out and buy more storage for their systems, for example. If we have a look at a quick M365 example is something like Teams messages in private channels. So they aren't supported by retention policy. So that's a good example of a limitation that you need to take into account when you're planning what kind of data you need retaining, those Teams messages that are created in the private channels. From an Azure perspective, let's look at Azure Virtual Machines. So Azure Virtual Machines have some limitations with Azure Backup, things like backing up encrypted disks that are larger than 4 terabytes in size. That's currently not supported. Backing up a virtual machine with a disk size that's greater than 32 terabytes currently isn't supported. And there's also a maximum of 18 restore points. So once you get to restore point number 18, you're not going to have access to the next one when that one rolls over and the restore point number 19 isn't going to be available anymore. So it really does just come back down to going through the documentation, maybe running up a bit of a test environment and throwing some data in there, and really being clear on what your requirements are to see which solutions are going to fit your needs or not.
Excellent. So we have a question in the queue about SCCM, and Pumala, this one is listed for you. You know, it's not related to our topic today, so if it's something we need to take offline, please feel free to do so. But let's see what we can do. So
somebody's channeling my SCCM, like, you know. Once a long time ago, I may have touched an SCCM server. The admin may have let me manage it for a couple months.
All right, well, let's look at the question. So to date, we utilize SCCM for Microsoft patching, looking to bring third-party applications into compliance as well. Are you able to speak on how that may be possible with Microsoft?
Yes, you can do it. Based off what I've actually been able to do. Depending on the application, there are certain ones that you can push down via SCCM. And you can also push down custom scripts via SCCM as well, down to the machine, and do some Frankensteining scripts, whatnot, to run the update if you need to. So there are ways to use SCCM for that. It may not be straight out of the box, but if you want everything in a centralized patching system and maintenance system, yes. Anything is possible. Is it going to be easy? I can't guarantee that, but anything is, you know, it's doable. It's going to take work though, so you'll just have to weigh the pros and cons of how much work it's going to be to push down those updates.
Excellent. Thank you for taking that.
Yeah, and if you're going to do it, I'd get a bottle of Advil, because there are some applications that work, but there's workarounds for that.
All right, so Sonia, this question is directed to both of us, but I'm going to have you take it, and I can chime in if needed. So do you think that there is any difference with respect to any potential deduplication offered by Microsoft versus like a third-party solution? So for example, with Azure Backup, I think that's where this is most relevant, and backend, you know, storage. Is there any deduplication or compression offered in that solution, the Azure Backup solution?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. I'm not 100% sure of how the dedupe works and how vendors may do it differently. At the end of the day, this deduplication is a process of, in essence, removing the duplicates in the backup. So we're only storing one copy of a thing, but then we can reference it in other places where it's similar, and where it's an effort to reduce the amount of data that we're actually storing, because an email in my inbox may be the same as an email in your inbox, for example. When it comes down to the technical aspects of deduplication, there's only so much that you can do when you get down to that sort of bits and bytes level of data on disk. But I'm not 100% sure. I don't know that anybody is doing it particularly radically different, because in essence we're all using the same sort of technology under the hood. But I'm not across the particularly how that works at that level for the Microsoft services and how third-party offerings might differ. Sorry.
No, all good. So I will take then the other part of that question. So on the third-party side versus like the Microsoft side, I do know that with the Cohesity third-party offering for data protection, we do deduplication and compression differently in a way that our customers do significantly see a reduction in their storage needs as a result of it. And I do believe that it is enough of a differentiator that if that is of interest, that is something that enterprises should take a look at by way of our offering. All right. So lots of questions queuing. I'm just taking a peek through them. All right, so this is a question for you, Pumala. And it's a long question, so bear with me. Exchange, SharePoint, and Teams emails and files are backed up by Microsoft. For example, the E3, E5 license has been removed from an employee who left. How long will Microsoft keep the backup for this active user? Maybe we take that part of the question first because, well, I'll let you just start there. This might be a two-part question.
Yeah, so as far as, I think I might have to get back. It depends on what the retention policy is here, as how long you're actually going to keep it. From my understanding of Office 365, it's not like, oh, you know, it's not the same for everyone.
It's not backup. I guess that's the thing that stands out to me there.
Yeah,
and it's like, 30 days.
Yeah, I'm looking here like, isn't that like, it's because we're not backing up.
Right.
It's based off the retention policy. And if your organization has already set something that is different from the default, it's not going to be the same, right? So depending on what your organization or your administrator has already set.
Yeah. Okay, and then let's see, the second part of the question, if we need to keep specific types of Office 365 data, et cetera, for 7 years, should we be using a third party or should we use retention policy and legal hold?
Okay, the gods are probably going to like strike lightning on me. I would use a third party. If you need it for 7 years for someone that's already left, yeah. This is because now you can release that license, back it up, get it off site, put it away in your archives. Then you don't have to deal with it. If you ever have to go back, you can restore that data and then activate the license. But for 7 years, unless you're going to have a retention policy that says you're keeping everything forever, and I'd like to, you know, who is keeping data forever, right? There's got to be some type of set, you know, policy that you're putting in place that says, okay, we're only keeping X amount, because eventually this space does run out. It's not an infinite pool of storage, even though we like to think that. Even organizations that have on-premises hardware like to think they have an infinite pool of storage, but you don't. That's why backups are in place, because you can offload that to a backup, copy it over, goes on to an archive disk or a tape. 7 years in the vault, off to Iron Mountain, right, Teresa?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think you have much more control over your data when you take that approach of pulling it, you know, into a third-party solution. That's what I've done in every enterprise I've worked in.
Tapes in this scenario, tape is not dead.
Or, no, but you can also do off-site replication, right? Yeah, it doesn't even have to be tape. It can be replication or archive.
Yeah, or low-cost storage. Mm-hmm. From an archivist perspective, this is where that's not dead. Mm-hmm. That would be an ideal situation for that. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
7 years is a long time.
Well, thank you so much, Pumala. Thank you, Sonia. We are out of time. Thank you, everyone in the audience who asked such great questions today, and enjoy the rest of Ignite.